We have a vision to be an international university of choice, anchored in Africa, dynamically shaping the future. At UJ, we're committed to creating a teaching and learning environment that will retain and produce visionary, able, innovative people who remain firmly at the center of creating tomorrow.
On behalf of the Council and the Executive Management and UJ staff, it gives me great pleasure to welcome our university graduates and guests to this virtual graduation ceremony. As is the case in many parts of the world, South Africans are currently experiencing elements of a state of national lockdown due to the pandemic. This is without doubt a defining global crisis of our time and the most significant challenge we have faced in a long time. Due to restrictions on public gatherings during COVID-19 pandemic, the university had to postpone its graduations, which would have comprised of more than 60 graduation ceremonies. The qualifications will instead be awarded and conferred to our graduates in absentia by means of this virtual graduation ceremony. Higher education, like many other sectors, is reeling under the impact of the disease. As we all continue to navigate through these unique and evolving challenges, the University of Johannesburg has taken the necessary steps to ensure business continuity. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all our staff for their support to our students during these challenging times. Due to the commitment from our staff and students, we completed the 2020 year on time and with an improved student success rate. In total, almost 1,300 academic qualifications are awarded and conferred at these virtual graduation ceremonies. This includes more than 10,000 undergraduate diplomas or degrees and almost 2,300 postgraduate degrees, including more than 500 master's and 100 doctoral degrees. Given that a graduation ceremony is such a momentous occasion in a student's life, we hope to have a celebration ceremony for our graduates later in the year. I'm reminded of the words of our former President Nelson Mandela, and I quote, "Our children are the rock on which our future will be built, our greatest asset as a nation. They will be the leaders of our country, the creators of our national wealth, who care and protect our people." Close quote. Graduates, you have been groomed for leadership. You are equipped to join the world of work locally and abroad. You are empowered to be a leader in the fourth industrial revolution, where technology is infused in our workplaces, homes, and all aspects of our lives. The world you are venturing into is abundant with opportunities, but is also beset with challenges. Yet you have the most fantastic opportunity to be the architects and builders of a new world as you embark on your selected career. We know that you will use your successes and your strength to make positive contributions to society as responsible corporate citizens and future leaders. As you glow with justified pride in your successes, bear in mind that you have not walked this journey alone. You have walked with your fellow students, lecturers, tutors, and the firm encouragement and support of family and friends. As you bask in your achievements and move on to the next chapter, we take this moment to thank them for being your walking companions. Graduates, we hope to see you again when furthering with your studies and as active alumni. On behalf of UJ, I would like to congratulate all our graduates. Chancellor, I now request you to confer or award their respective qualifications. I thank you. Ngiyabonga bayadanki.
By virtue of the powers vested in me, I now constitute this meeting as a lawful congregation of the University of Johannesburg. E le ge ke hlompha maatla ao ke filweng go ona, bjale ke thea phuthego ye ya go ba semolao University ya Johannesburg. Krachtens die bevoegdheden aan my toevertrouw, verklaar ik nou hierdie vergadering as 'n wettige kongregasie van die Universiteit van Johannesburg. Ngenxa yegunya enginikwe lona, ngimisa lo mhlangano njengokuhlangana okusemthethweni kwenyuvesi yase-Johannesburg. I hereby confirm the conferral or awarding of the qualifications on the candidates as listed in the graduation programs. Executive Dean, please present the faculty and the candidates.
Dear graduates, we in the Faculty of Education are self-critical and reflective, as good educators should be. Therefore, we continuously grapple with the education dilemmas of our world. We ask ourselves how well we contribute through our research and the programs that we offer to deal with these dilemmas. It is sometimes said that universities do not prepare pre-service teachers who are classroom ready. Also, universities must do a better job at preparing teachers to deal with the challenging circumstances in many South African schools. Recently, another matter has been added, namely, how do teacher education and development programs prepare teachers for the fourth industrial revolution and the fast-changing world? And currently, during the time of COVID-19, all of us working in the field of education must come to grips with the consequences of the lessons learned about education in a time of volatility and uncertainty. I agree with Daniel Willingham and Benjamin Riley, who wrote last year about schools and schooling in an article in the Washington Post. They said, "If the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that the future is unpredictable." So, we are faced with a dilemma of educating and researching to address immediate education needs and for a fast-changing and unpredictable future. Quite a tall order. Our vantage point is that teacher education and development should be steeped in local challenges and aim to provide teacher candidates and in-service teachers with the tools to deal with the demands of a fast-changing world, which is increasingly driven by technology. The Faculty of Education strives towards dynamic knowledge-making for the 21st century. This implies to us contextually grounded, future-oriented, and globally significant teaching and research. In other words, we strive to do teaching and research that address local education needs and issues. Still, the imperative of global relevance and future orientation also means that our work should be cutting-edge and robust. Dear graduates, we trust that this is indeed what you have encountered while studying with us, that you have experienced local and global relevance as well as a future orientation. A few years ago, I had the privilege to attend a presentation of the astronaut Terry Wirtz at an education symposium in Hong Kong. I thoroughly enjoyed his talk. He spoke about his educational journey and his teachers. He noted that whenever he has a chance, he goes back to his teachers to thank them. He said, "When you teach kids, you never know what they will become, but you will have an impact on their lives." This is a powerful message to all of us involved in education. We do have an impact on the lives of those we teach. We need to be conscious of this at all times. Dear graduates, I would have loved to see you in person walking the stage and to rejoice with your loved ones in the audience. Nevertheless, this is still a joyous and momentous occasion. Enjoy it, celebrate. a warm word of congratulations. Go and positively impact lives.
Miss Nadine Bernice Blow, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Tabisa Robokiana, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Ruth Rachel Bosch, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Katie Webutelezi, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Denise Cordia, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Lesin Edin de Klerk, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Shakira Abdul Rahim Dodat, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Mr. Majahe Josie Linda Dlamini, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Ntombizotwa Gama, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Taylor Vanessa Grenshiol, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Raisa Hendricks, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Tehofazo Francina Jeanette Hlongwane, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Mrs. Piwe Hlongwane, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Taylor Jade Joseph, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching.
With distinction.
Miss Michelle Labani Kumalo, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Wendy N. Nontlantla Kulu, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Matobela Gwinda, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Kerona Langa, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Mrs. Pumzile Sbanisetu Madela, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Kuzo Bridget Madisa, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Mr. Samgele Tabani Madondo, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Happiness Basitsana Mafeke, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Palesa Mafuko, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Huzo Aretha Mahlaela, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Christy N. Maitland, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Naledi Makabani, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Kwena Evelyn Mahakwa, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Ramatsubane Fortune Mamabolo, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Kwena Bridget Manaka, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Faith Hope Zandile Manana, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Charlotte Masipetlu Mapumulo, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Jeanette Masemula, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Vuisile Mashele, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Sylvia Matebula, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Ntwanano Matumbu, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Shannon Matthews, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Nontogozo Mavimbela, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Asande Innocentia Mazibugo, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Zamaswazi Prosperity Mbuyani, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Pearl Mfene, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Nomfundo Karabo Mhlongo, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Halalisile Mkabela, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Mr. Mbegezeli Mkonza, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Joanna Mlambo, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Ntombizanele Mlangeni, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Nosipo Abigail Mguni, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Bongiwe Bonisile Mtungwa, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Nosipo Clementia Mtungwa, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Tuduezo Mudikwe, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Mr. Khomotso Khopulang Mufukeng, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Itumeleng Mukhanedi, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Mahlatse Muhlala, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Duduezang Joy Muroke, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Palisa Asanele Mutaung, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Rebecca Sheila Motlale, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Sibusiswe Nolutando Msimanga, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Nolutando Zinhle Mtanti, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Tiara Narain Semi, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Dumsile Nompumelelo Ndlovu, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Duduzile Precious Ndobe, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Manaledi Anangubeni, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Bongeka Promise Pungula, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Shariska Louise Rath, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Ayanda Surprise Khadebe, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Lutendo Priscilla Ramapundu, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Mrs. Pindile Petunia Ramate, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Leonie Remrock, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Jessica K. Rietveld, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Matsela Sefura Silai, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Bafenze Belinda Silowa, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Itumeleng Dokas Sirasingwe, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Matebuho Maria Setojani, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Mrs. Pamandla Menziwa Sibego, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Mr. Ntantla Siyabonga Sibego, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Mr. Sizolwami Skakane, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Pumelele Sitole, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Nadia Swartz, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Kamuhelo Tifo, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Prudence Notando Tabete, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Cindy Shabalala, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Nyeleti Holiness Chisana, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Miss Hailey van der Merwe, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Mrs. Dora Vugeya, Bachelor of Education, Foundation Phase Teaching. Mr. Dillon Roy Bakos, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Shamaine Nogulunga Bia, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Casey Logan Bremner, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Cassidy Kenton Davids, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Notando Nicolene Diale, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Kokezo Ditejo, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Samgelisiwe Precious Dlalisa, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Kim Caitlin Dupree, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Samira Fredericks, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Siphelele Ningi Goqo, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Temrin Brandy Misha Jacobs, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Mangele Protasia Keswa, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Ngobile Rifilwe Kumalo, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Nokolo Kesia Kunene, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Hani Matlou Leboho, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Lisa Katlejo Ramaisela Lehodi, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Mbali Lehwale, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Ketelo Madlala, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Mr. Samgeliswe Prince Makakula, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Zikona Makalaganga, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Jabulile Winter Rose Mambane, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Gugu Zodwa Masango, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Lebogang Inostentia Mashaba, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Mr. Shaulegani Austin Mashaba, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Flonipile Florence Masilela, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Litabo Princess Mawela, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Lorenda Maisa, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Fisoguhle Nogulunga Mazbugo, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Ntombigaise Mazibugo, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Connie Pel Mbata, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Nkosingphile Cindy Mbata, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Zianda Mendu, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Buhle Brightness Mkwanazi, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Innocent Itumeleng Mudisa, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Hopulang Manewo Mufukeng, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Maserole Mujela, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Desire Matabo Mohope, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Gaugelo Mulapo, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Mr. Jan Karabo Molefe, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Lerato Muloi, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Matapelo Miriam Mushwete, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Ms. Ndomeleze Mtengwane, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Nikki Mtandeki, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Nokuthula Lucia Mthembu, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Swelihle Nomalungelo Mthethwa, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Mr. Siyabonga Mthweni, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Mukundi Mulelu, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Bridget Londiwe Ngayana, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Nam Ndabana, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Nomcebo Siamtusa Ndlovu, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Mr. Alex Ndlovu, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Andiswa Siphokazi Ngcobo, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Agnes Angel Ngongwane, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Nonhlanhla Interpreter Ngwenya, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Tshegofatso Kabule Nkadimeng, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Nokuthula Sthembiso Nkosi, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Gugu Cynthia Nkosi, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Asanda Yolanda Nombewu, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Mr. Siyabonga Nyawo, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Sajida Patel, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Mr. Nkosingphile Praise God Phakathi, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Neo Bowe, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Mr. Siphesihle Lusizo Radebe, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Tabisile Joyce Ratupetsane, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Nhlanhla Regina Rekgotso, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Ashley Demi Sampson, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Tejo Sibapu, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Nomawetu Gracious Sidibe, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Katlego Reneilwe Siebe, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Otsile Segale, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Simangele Patricia Silepe, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Sinetemba Ngobile Shandu, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Ntabiseng Sibia, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Ayanda Sikonyela, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Karabo Frida Sihlangu, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Mr. Kenneth Nkosenhle Skosana, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Jabulile Ntokozo Smelane, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Zandisile Charity Sithole, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Karen Sithole, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Puluso Sithole, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Nelisiwe Mavis Sithole, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Matuludi Khopotso Helen Sithole, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Lana Stein, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Miranda Nomvuselelo Stokwe, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Palisa Tladi, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Tolagele Brenda Shabalala, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Ntogozo Pamela Shabalala, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Fatima Waseim, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Pumelele Elizabeth Zikali, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Netemba Proud Zondo, Bachelor of Education, Intermediate Phase Teaching. Miss Jennifer Heather Austin, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching.
With distinction.
Mr. Mugamat Tagir Charles, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Andrew Makungu Chauke, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Refile Chokwe, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Murukwe Paswana Chweu, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Karina Elizabeth Gutsie, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Lungile Dlamini, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Andile Nonkulego Clementine Romo, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching.
With distinction.
Mr. Sanele Kamede, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Dr. Monisola Itohan Ikile, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching.
With distinction.
Mr. Nelson Mukhwezi Khache, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Matunjwa Patrick Kalishwayo, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Claudia Henriette Zandi Kowane, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Emmanuel Kumalo, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Matimu Kane Kubai, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Robin Angela Lowe, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching.
With distinction.
Mr. Moshe Mabasa, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Bonginkosi Mahaye, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Kilebukhile Veronica Makwakwa, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Tobile Malaza, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Nomsa Mutlankane Masemola, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Professor Mashilwane, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mrs. Piwe Frida Masugu, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Siabonga Vusumuzi Mate, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Refilo Matitwane, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Munwabisu Mavuso, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Neo Valeria Mbau, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Zitobile Mbazwana, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mrs. Pelele Mkunu, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Spamandla Wiseman Mlotshwa, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Dika Sidwell Mufukeng, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Palisa Sonia Mokhele, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Lebohang Muloi, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Mudisa Utsile Muluse, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Musitsana Fiona Munonyana, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Whitney Matsimele Muramaga, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Tlabo Muremi, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Silaelo Maria Muriana, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Tebogo Morwe, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Francina Moshatlejo Mutupa, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Chokamoni Grace Msimango, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Nogubongwa Stabiso Mtembu, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Brilliant Mtombeni, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Mulalo Saint Munyai, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Tiseto Munyai, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Mohau Abraham Nchane, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Mbali Sibusisile Nchangase, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Bonisile Sakile Ngumalo, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Mpho Musehlane Rachweni, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Masejo Khatebe, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching.
With distinction.
Mr. Gift Dintle Ramahotswa, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Itumeleng C. Bobby, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Danielle Joanne Silane, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Semutse Selowa, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Portia Nogufa Suodisa, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Mbongeleni Lindoguhle Sibisi, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Tobega Sikakane, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Nicole Elizabeth Sneyman, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Low Charles Stein, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Sfundo Ntlantla Tabete, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Ms. Bulenda Beauty Chidumo, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Mr. Byron Bradley van Gerenen, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching. Miss Lerato Lorraine Zikitane, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, Further Education and Training Teaching.
With distinction.
Mr. Ismail Ali, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Miss Natalie Maria Bompas, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Miss Ayanda Prudence Butelezi, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Miss Buisiwe Cebekulu, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Miss Yamgela Enenda, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Miss Minerva Njinuo Kenyi, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Miss Julia Kumalo, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies.
With distinction.
Miss Lucia Tandile Kok, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Mr. Moki Jacobus Ledwaba, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Ms. Dimakato Monica Majake, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Ms. Nandi Winnie Masego, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Mrs. Stembiso Promise Matonzi, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Mr. Linda Ndumiso Mkunu, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Miss Michaela Julia Michelle, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Mr. Muteu Stephen Mkize, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Miss Njabulo Lerato Mdebele, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Miss Puti Tabita Muchaki, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Mr. Itumeleng Walter Mompati, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Mr. Sabelo Velenkosini Msweli, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Mrs. Lindeloguhle Perfectness Mtetwa, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Mrs. Ntombifuthi Mtshali, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Miss Cordelia Sianda Ndwandwe, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Miss Bongiwe Ngobese, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Miss Peliwe Nombolo, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Mr. Lishata Edwin Pala, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Mr. Justice Huzo Silashe, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Miss Tulisile Sopudula, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Miss Jade Lee Martinique Van Sale, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Miss Xolisiwe Zondi, Bachelor of Education Honours in Curriculum Studies. Mrs. Atenksoi Afolabi, Bachelor of Education Honours in Education, Leadership and Management. Miss Nwanangkhudi Musejwadi Bushielo, Bachelor of Education Honours in Education, Leadership and Management. Mr. Thokozane Obri Busakwe, Bachelor of Education Honours in Education, Leadership and Management.
Mr. Delmain D'Amico Cochrane, Bachelor of Education Honours.
Miss Raisa Dawood, Bachelor of Education Honours in Education, Leadership and Management. Miss Ernestine Rochelle Dupont, Bachelor of Education Honours in Education, Leadership and Management. Miss Babalelo Kiemi, Bachelor of Education Honours in Education, Leadership and Management. Miss Diana Koketso Kekana, Bachelor of Education Honours in Education, Leadership and Management. Miss Irene Ncha Khan, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Mr. Katekani Rion Kosa, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Makobo Musikatli Leboko, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Mrs. Jeanette Muyahabo Masego, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Petile Tobegile Mashinini, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Lucia Kitumetsi Memani, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Mr. Andile Perfect Mwango, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Mr. Francis Mutlani, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Tshegofatso Mudisane, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Bakang Mulibatsi, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Mukhalakana Gaspar Muloto, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Mpulukeng Rebecca Mungake, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Tukuluho Bella Mutswana, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Ntombufuiti Innocentia Msibi, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Jeanette Bongiwe Msimanga, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Mr. Ntando Mtetwa, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Senamile Mtetwa, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Tobeka Shamaine Nkosi, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Mrs. Olusoji Elizabeth Oloba, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Benis Elena Parker, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management.
With distinction.
Ms. Matlala Patricia Ramabele, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Devashka Baichanat Rampesat, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Mbali Jeanette Sifunza, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Mr. Siyabonga Tenderness Sitole, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Excellent Tobegas Kosana, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Candice Lee Stirman, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Mr. Chifiwa Wesley Tobachale, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Mr. Mamelo Tlapi, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Kumbelo Chililo, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Samgelisiwe Zulu, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management. Ms. Qiniso Zamandla Zungu, Bachelor of Education Honors in Education Leadership and Management.
With distinction.
Ms. Faith Karimufumbi, Master of Education in Education. Mr. Bright Magabvu, Master of Education in Education. Mr. Sipesihle Ntokozo Mpumelelo Masego, Master of Education in Education.
With distinction. The Chancellor's Medal for the Most Meritorious Master Study for 2020 in the Faculty of Education is awarded to Spesihle Ndogozo Mpumelelo Masego.
Mr. Ntambeleni Edward Mpilo, Master of Education in Education. Mr. Philip Tulani Handsome Mtembu, Master of Education in Education. Mr. Koketso Andile Ntimbani, Master of Education in Education. Mrs. Kifilwe Evelyn Urekeng, Master of Education in Education. Miss Lufuno Belinda Chidumo, Master of Education in Education. Miss Yumna Bamath, Master of Education in Educational Management. Mr. Ibrahim Bismillah, Master of Education in Educational Management. Mr. David Chingwaru, Master of Education in Educational Management. Mr. Muhammad Yusuf Hamid, Master of Education in Educational Management. Mrs. Fatima Ismail, Master of Education in Educational Management.
With distinction.
Mrs. Josephine Ellen Khaswe, Master of Education in Educational Management. Mr. Junaid Livet King, Master of Education in Educational Management. Mrs. Teresa N. McKay, Master of Education in Educational Management.
With distinction.
Ms. Phakama Mbane, Master of Education in Educational Management. Mr. Misha Sitole, Master of Education in Educational Management. Ms. Sandhya Sanka, Master of Education in Educational Management. Mrs. Jenna Lee Wade, Master of Education in Educational Management. Ms. Esther Carol August, Master of Education in Educational Psychology. Ms. Stephanie Julia Murray, Master of Education in Educational Psychology. Ms. Nomthandazo Princess Nchangase, Master of Education in Educational Psychology. Ms. Yumreth Dalani Pakula, Master of Education in Educational Psychology. Mrs. Amira Surti Pillay, Master of Education in Educational Psychology. Ms. Thembalihle Purity Kumalo, Master of Education in Information and Communication Technology in Education. Ms. Dibuthelezwe Mtombeni, Master of Education in Information and Communication Technology in Education. Ms. Karin Lynn Node, Master of Education in Information and Communication Technology in Education.
With distinction.
Mr. Simbarashe Matemera, Master of Education in Philosophy of Education. Mr. Gift Cheba, Philosophia Doctor, Education.
Cheva Gift. Thesis entitled, A Case Study of How South African Grade 2 Learners Solve Addition and Subtraction Word Problem. The research for the PhD investigated Grade 2 learners' strategies for solving mathematics word problems in subtraction and addition of two-digit whole numbers. Various methods were used to collect data, including tests, classroom exercises, and interviews of over 120 learners from 5 primary schools in the Gauteng province. The findings include that while learners displayed several errors in their quest to solve problems of subtraction and addition of multiple-digit whole numbers, they also constructed their own mental mathematical strategies. The conclusion was that learners should be allowed to invent their own efficient procedures that can then be mapped into conventional algorithms. A book chapter from the doctoral thesis study has been accepted for publication.
Mr. Malau David Matsepe, Philosophy Doctor, Education.
Malau David Matsepe, entitled Understanding Academic Identity with reference to subjectivity and agency in selected South African universities. Mr. Matsepe's thesis examines how academics negotiate their careers and construct enabling academic identities. Considering the inequalities around race, gender, and social difference, the study foregrounds the role of agency in its dialectic with the surrounding environment in building a strong academic identity. In this regard, individual background emerges as an asset or liability in that it enables and constrains what academics intend, how they interpret their actions and the world around them, and how they're interpreted or socially constructed in their interactions with other people. It is primarily through their agency that they can succeed as academics within the highly exclusionary South African environment. However, the theoretical insights from this study also show that the construction of academic identities with reference to subjectivity and agency is an area that still requires further research.
Misindiswa Nontembiso Msimango, Philosophy, Doctor, Education.
Sindiswa Nontembiso Imsimango. This thesis explored students' undergraduate experiences that shaped their professional identity and influenced their decision to pursue postgraduate study. A mixed methods approach was used to collect empirical data from both a research-intensive university and a comprehensive university in South Africa. The study was conducted across different faculties in the two institutions. The data was analyzed using a variety of methods. Drawing on the findings from both institutions, Cindy developed a model called the Flow Model of Professional Identity Formation. It is hoped that the model can be tested further at different universities in South Africa, including universities of technology. Eventually, the model can be used as a framework to support undergraduate students to progress to postgraduate studies. However, it can be also used to transform knowledge from both academia and industry for the public good.
Mrs. Precious Bupe Sipuka, Philosophy, Doctor, Education.
Precious Bupe Sipuka. This thesis explored the significant role that institutional actors and contexts play in constructing and enacting good teaching. As a sub-project grounded within a larger NRF-funded project, the thesis aimed at contributing towards improving professional development and teaching and learning. The study showed significant gaps between policy imperatives and enactment. This was evident in the disjuncture between policy text, actors' views, and practices. Furthermore, weaknesses in institutional structures and processes appeared to constrain efforts towards quality teaching. This is exacerbated by inadequate systematic and integrated approaches towards teaching and learning. Through the policy object approach, this thesis contributed towards an innovative and nuanced analysis of education policy research in higher education by employing a social constructivist and practice-based approach to theorizing teaching and learning and highlighting the need for systematic-driven approaches. The thesis proposes a policy-driven model for teaching and learning centered on addressing key quality challenges.
Mr. Runesh Ramhari, Doctor of Philosophy, Education.
Runesh Ramhari. The thesis, Mentorship Practices and Social Learning of Novice Learners at a University in Johannesburg. Let me do that again. It's not learners, it's lecturers. Ramhari Runesh, thesis entitled Mentorship Practices and Social Learning of Novice Lecturers at a University in Johannesburg. This study explored the perspectives and experiences of novice lecturers in mentorship practices at a university in Johannesburg. It was conducted within the interpretivist paradigm of social inquiry, which revealed that due to lack of faculty institutional support, novice lecturers experienced isolation, loneliness, as they were left to their own devices to survive. Most felt preluded from community of practice. To fit in the contexted field of academia and survive, most adopted survival tactics of swim rather than sink. The formal mentoring and communities of practice that exist as pathways to social learning were largely non-existent. Instead, informal mentoring arrangements took prominence, thus enabling successful integration into the academy. Most significantly, social learning mediated by social media platforms like WhatsApps featured prominently in enabling acceptance and mentorship into the academia. The study illuminated the impact that the fourth industrial revolution has had on the professional development of academics in the form of social media mentoring.
Ms. Daphne Mawila, Doctor of Education, Educational Psychology.
Daphne Mawila. The study investigated the relationship between resilience and social ecological support among learners with specific learning disability. Specific learning disability affects the academic, psychological, and social-emotional functioning of the learner. Preventing risk from escalating among learners with SLD is paramount. The study adopted an exploratory quantitative research approach. Using purposive sampling, 217 learners from 4 Alcin schools responded to a Child and Youth Resilience Measure questionnaire. The study found that social ecological support and resilience have a strong relationship. Individual traits, relationships with caregivers and peers, education, spirituality, culture and community were social ecological resources that enhance a learner's resilience. The study revealed that resilience is a partnered process whereby the social ecological provides learners with SLD with the resources they require to reinforce their resilience.
Chancellor, it is now my honor to introduce to you the Honorary Doctoral Candidate, Dr. Gloria Jean Ladsen Billings. Dr. Gloria Jean Ladsen Billings is one of the top scholars in the field of education in the world. Throughout her illustrious career, her scholarship has made significant contributions to education through research that aims to transform and serve society. Her focus on social justice, education for diversity and democracy, and a critical stance on race and ethnicity in educational success have significantly influenced educational policy and practice in the USA and internationally. This PhD in education honoris causa is awarded to her to recognize her significant contribution to the field of education as a highly acclaimed scholar, academic leader, and role model to many. It acknowledges her commitment to the collaborative pursuit of knowledge that has a transformative agenda in the service of society and a focus on social justice, education for diversity and democracy, as well as her critical stance on the role of race and ethnicity in educational success. Dr. Gloria Jean Ladsen Billings' scholarly work resonates with the commitment of the University of Johannesburg to addressing the decolonization of knowledge, its positioning as a diverse university that proudly celebrates its African history and its potential to contribute to innovations that improve the lives of its people. The University of Johannesburg hereby confers an honorary doctoral degree onto Dr. Gloria Jean Ladsen Billings.
Greetings to the administration, faculty, students, and wider community of the University of Johannesburg. Under ideal circumstances, I would be enjoying this honor in your beautiful country of South Africa and the bustling city of Johannesburg. Having been to several different parts of South Africa, quaint city of Bloemfontein, the spectacular rural landscapes of the township of Kwakwa, the amazing and historic waterfront city of Cape Town, and of course the business, trade, and intellectual center that is Johannesburg, I do indeed know what I am missing. However, the pandemic that is COVID has forced us all to do business in a very different way. I cannot tell you how humbled I am to be selected as an honorary degree recipient of the University of Johannesburg. It is a special honor to know that colleagues in the wider global context have appreciated the work I've attempted to do on behalf of students in our schools who have been the most disadvantaged and marginalized in the education process. My own early education in the U.S. version of apartheid schooling, known as school segregation, showed me firsthand how important education could be as a vehicle not just for vocation, but also for liberation. Teachers have many powers. They can encourage, they can inspire, they can support, they can direct. But one power they do not have is the power of clairvoyance. They cannot see into the future. They do not know beforehand what the future holds for the students who sit in their classrooms. In the U.S., I often tell teacher candidates, you have no ability to know which of your students will have the oratory skills and the moral courage of a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You have no knowledge of whether another Barack Obama sits before you each day. Indeed, you cannot know if one of the young women sitting in your classes will one day take Kamala Harris's place. Similarly, to teachers in South Africa, you will not know beforehand from where the next Nelson Mandela will come, or who is the budding Bishop Tutu. Your work will be in the investment of young people to build a strong, democratic nation that becomes the envy of the continent and the world. The young people who comprise South Africa represent the promise of the future. For the past year, I've been talking to school administrators, teachers, teacher educators, and education researchers about the 4 pandemics that our students find themselves in. Yes, 4. There is, of course, the coronavirus that has forced us all into remote communication. But there is the pandemic of racism we must work to eliminate if we are to maximize the human potential the planet has to offer. There's a 3rd pandemic of likely economic collapse brought on by the uneven and inequitable response to COVID. Far too many nations find themselves struggling to house, feed, and clothe their citizens. And finally, there is a looming environmental catastrophe. But as bad as these things are, they also offer us an opportunity. We have the opportunity to push pause and reset our educational systems, our economic systems, our health systems, and our environmental policies. If we are smart, we will do this, and we will expect our education systems, universities and colleges, as well as pre-collegiate schools to lead the way. I accept this honor with the hopes that we will do just that. Again, I say, thank you very much.
The devastation brought by COVID-19 pandemic has left the global community in disarray. However, it is also a period that has shown our collective courage and unity as a country. Graduates, we are proud of your achievements. Yours is a truly outstanding and landmark achievement for you personally, your family and friends, your community, and for all of us here at UJ, South Africa and beyond. As we all celebrate, our graduates stand as reminders that accomplishment, triumph, and celebration are the outcomes of dedication and perseverance, traits which our nation and our world should draw great inspiration from. Our hope is that the time and sacrifices that you, your families, the university, and the state have invested in your education will now see you continue to grow intellectually, professionally, and as committed and respected citizens of our country and the wider global community. Let us also express words of gratitude to parents, families, spouses, partners, and friends for their support, motivation, and love during your studies. A graduation is an important achievement, and it also marks a new beginning. As our great leader Nelson Mandela wrote in his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, he said, "I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I have made missteps along the way, but I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I have taken a moment here to rest, to steal a view of the glorious vista that surrounds me, to look back on the distance I have come. But I can only rest for a moment, for with freedom come responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my long walk is not yet ended." Having reached the summit of the mountain, one realizes, as Nelson Mandela reminds us, that there are even more mountains and valleys ahead. You graduated today at a time when the world faces considerable challenges. However, we are confident that our UJ graduates will contribute significantly towards a sustainable, better world. We believe our graduates have acquired the ingredients to become leaders that display exemplary ethical leadership that sets the tone for high standards. Remain critical thinkers and, armed with your UJ qualification, be change agents for a better world. To our graduates, Chancellor's Medal and Faculty Prize winners, our Masters and Doctoral candidates, and their supervisors, congratulations and well done with your exceptional academic performance. Special congratulations are extended to our distinguished honorary doctorate recipients for this year. UJ is truly proud of and privileged to have this association with you. I thank you. Re a leboga, baya danki, siyabonga.
University of Johannesburg. The future reimagined.